On January the 2nd of this year, I attended a meeting of the Environment Agency which was entitled Meet the Regulator. Now, normally I don't bother with these things because meeting the regulator, the Environment Agency, is a complete and utter waste of time. But with the development of the idea of creating new nuclear and building new nuclear power stations and all of the amazing developments which have been occurring in the last year about small modular reactors and developments suggested by President Trump in America that the whole world is going to go nuclear and so forth, I thought it might be interesting for me to go along and actually see who the people were who were making these decisions. In other words, the Environment Agency. In England, the Environment Agency is the sharp barrier between the government and its desire to contaminate the environment for making money, I guess you'd call it, in this case nuclear, and the people who have to suffer the consequences of the contamination of the environment. And this is something that I've been interested in for a very long time. So I really wanted to just see who the people were who were making these decisions. So I went along. It was a video conference, and it lasted about an hour or so, I forget, maybe 2 hours. And you were allowed to ask questions, and I did ask a question on behalf of the European Committee on Radiation Risk, which I am the scientific secretary of. But anyway, so there were these people making the presentations about new nuclear under titles which included Powering Up Britain, that's a plan, I've got it down here, and Great British Nuclear, and Atlantic Partnership. See, all of these things make me rather frightened. But what I want to present today, and this is the introduction to this, is an interview which I had that was a follow-up to this meeting. I mean, in the meeting you can't really ask an awful lot of questions, and when you do ask the questions, they're responded to really quite superficially. But then after this happened, I got a letter, an email from these people, or from another outfit, which was a market research organisation, and they wanted me to fill out a questionnaire about what I thought about the Environment Agency. And I thought, okay, I'll fill it out. So this is a tick box questionnaire, basically, so you're not allowed to say that they're all a bunch of lunatics or idiots and they're killing everyone. You just have to tick boxes, which I did. So then I got another response from these same people, this nuclear, it's called Navigator Insight. So it's a sort of market research organisation, and obviously what they want to do is to find out what you think about the nuclear project, so that they can then make PowerPoints to all of the psychologists that they have, where these people decide how it is that they can change your mind. So they want to know what people think, so that they can figure out how to make them think something else, not to think what they're thinking. So basically, as I understand it, the people all think new nuclear is going to kill everybody with cancer, and they think, well, this is nonsense, because we know that the research shows that they can't kill everybody with cancer and blah blah blah. So what you have in the middle are these people who are Navigator Insight. Anyway, so I said, so they got back to me and they said, could we have a structured interview with you about why you think what you think, why you wrote these things that you wrote in the questionnaire. So I thought, right. Well, and they said we're going to video the response. We're going to video this interview, and I hope you're okay with that. I said, yes, of course, I'm okay with you videoing the interview. And then they're going to use the video of me in the interview, to present it in probably some conference with all of the people who want to change people's minds, in order to see how it is that they can change people's minds. I mean, so this is nothing to do with nuclear now, this is to do with sociology or psychology or social psychology or market research, that sort of area. And so this very nice young woman, Chinese woman, made an arrangement for me to talk with her on the 25th of June. and it went ahead. But what I didn't tell her is that while she was videoing me, I was videoing her. That is to say, I was videoing the questions that she asked and the answers that I gave. And at the same time, I thought, since this is going to go before all of these nuclear people in the Environment Agency, I could take the opportunity to actually lay out my arguments against new nuclear, of which there are many. Mainly arguments relating to research, published research in the peer-review literature that shows that the nuclear project has killed a lot of people. In fact, 500 million people, thereabouts. It's easy to show that. And what I also was able to tell her in the interview was that there's a new report of the European Committee on Radiation Risk, which I've been working at with my colleagues for the last year or two. And that's now complete. So that's going to be published soon, and it's going to contain all of the information and all of the evidence that shows that to develop nuclear as a source of energy is going to result in a lot of dead people. So this is my introduction to two. This is quite a long interview. It lasted quite a while. So I've cut it into two bits, and so the first bit is going to follow what I'm saying now, and then there will be a second one where you can see the rest of what I was saying. And I hope you'd be interested in watching this, because it's very, very important to realise that the way in which these people think is completely dislocated from reality. The Environment Agency, its remit, what it's for, is to protect the public, and workers of course, but mainly the public, from the results of any particular process. So in other words, what happens with the Environment Agency is that somebody comes along and says, I want to build a factory over here, and this factory is going to produce releases to the environment, to rivers, of something, okay? And the Environment Agency then says, you must write a report and say exactly how much it's going to be released, and then we will decide whether or not to give you permission. So that's the job of the Environment Agency. But in many, many cases, they give permission without really looking at the consequences of what these people are doing. So really, the reality of the Environment Agency is that we pretend to protect you and you pretend to believe us. But unfortunately, a lot of people do believe them, and certainly the government believes them, because the government puts pressure on them in the first place to find what they find. Anyway, I hope you will enjoy this exchange that I have with the market research people, in which I explain all of this. At the time it was very, very hot. I'm in France at the moment, and the temperature was about 40 degrees. So I'm not wearing a hat, and I'm looking a little bit hot down there, but you'll have to forgive me for looking hot. So there we are. I'll just say one thing now, very briefly, about the Environment Agency. The reason I went to this meeting was to try and see who the people were, to see the human beings, see the actual individuals, and try and make up my own mind about the sort of people that do this, the sort of people that make decisions to allow contamination of the environment. And I found 4 of them, okay, and I'll tell you who they are. There's Alan McGough, Nuclear New Build Policy Lead, Environment and Business. Andy Pinn, he seems to be the main man, New and Operational Nuclear Sites Strategy Manager. Then we have Candida Lean, Nuclear Waste Assessor. And then a chap called Cameron Sked, who's Senior Planning Specialist, Nuclear New Build. Okay, so these are the people making, and there they were. You could see them and talk to them, and you could see the sort of person they were. You can usually tell the sort of person someone is when you're listening to them talking. And to my mind, these were all PowerPoint people. So their understanding of reality has to do with what sort of PowerPoint they can make, and that's what they did. So there were all these PowerPoints. And then I looked them up on the internet to see what sort of qualifications they had. Had they published anything in the literature? Were they physicists? And so on. And I have to say that they were, none of them were anything at all that you could find. Except Alan McGough, who turns out to be a measurement technician physicist from long ago. And all of them have been in this outfit, the Environment Agency or the nuclear industry, since 2003. Here's Andy Pinn, 2003 to the present day. Candy Lean, April 2002 to the present day. Cameron Sked, September 2006 to the present day. And Alan McGough goes back to the Stone Age. And always with the nuclear industry. So how can anybody expect them to know anything at all about the effects of the operations that they are regulating? Well, you can't, and it's pointless to try. But anyway, listen to the listen to the interview and make your own mind up. Because it keeps jumping in with suggestions, you know, and every time you want to do something, it jumps in and says, can we help you with what you want to do? And then you get a whole new page full of nonsense, and it's impossible to get out of it. All right, anyway, that's enough waffling. Go on then, what do you want to say? What do you want to talk about? I have quite a lot to talk about myself, all right? So I mean, I know you want to ask me questions, but I have a number of suggestions that I couldn't make in the meeting when we had that meeting, you know, because there's a limited amount of time, and and basically the Environment Agency people take most of the time up presenting what it is that they want to say, quite naturally I say, and then you just get a chance to ask a few questions. And the only questions I asked were quite relevant, and I would quite like to follow those up in this interview if that were possible.
Make you aware, I'm not really part of the Environment Agency.
No, I understand that. You're a kind of sociological questionnaire, sort of, you know, asking people what they think about this and that. So you're probably not a scientist, I would guess, and you're working for a kind of organisation that does statistical analysis of what people think. So that then that can go forward to people who want to know how they can persuade people not to think like that, but to think like something else.
For this project, we just kind of the Environment Agency, they really would like to understand your experience and any feedback you have, and we just want to make sure we collect that, what you have to say to them, and, you know, feed that back to them.
Well, the reason...
I just wanted to
mention
the meeting. I just wanted to, for a bit of context, do you mind just telling me a bit more about sort of your role and what you do, how you engage?
I'm pretty much, I've been in this business of the nuclear thing. I don't know what they've told you about me, maybe nothing, but in case they haven't told you anything about me, I'm a scientist who studied the health effects of radiation since about 1990. I've written several books about it, and I've written probably more than 50 radiation papers on health effects. I've interviewed the Environment Agency on a few occasions, and certainly the Health Protection Agency and the Committee on Radiation Risk in the Environment, COMARE, on a few occasions. I've had lots of tussles with those people, lots of arguments with them, and if you look on the internet you'll find pretty much a lot of attacks on me over the things that I think and so forth. And yes, I mean, that's me. Maybe you know that, but anyway, the reason that I agreed to do this interview was I realised that the market people, that's you basically, that, you know, the market analytical people, are going to write this down. You know, they're going to record this meeting, and so there'll be a record of what it is I say. You've frozen now. Can you hear me? Hello? So they've cut us off. They've cut us off.
The Wi-Fi just turned off.
What?
The Wi-Fi just turned off.
Yeah, that's because they cut us off, because I was getting to an interesting point here.
No, the Wi-Fi turned off.
The Wi-Fi turned off?
Yes.
Why?
I turned it back on. I don't know.
Oh, it's come back. Okay, I'm sorry that something seemed to happen at this end. I don't know how far I got along the lines of talking to you, but I have a few points I want to raise when there's a moment to raise them. Now, you see, look at this now. Something has popped up here and says, make Acrobat your default PDF app. I don't know. It's just too much. And now we've got Lenovo is monitoring your connection. Well, I'm surprised the big boxing glove doesn't come out of the screen on a spring and punch me on the nose. That'll be the next thing.
Yeah, can you just double check and see and hear me okay now? Like, is the connection working okay for you?
Okay. Right, well, one of the things that you maybe don't know, but you may know, is that I collected a number of scientists together in 1998 who were independent from the organisation that the Environment Agency employs to advise it or to form the basis of its regulations. And the essential problem that I have with all of the Environment Agency interactions, whatever they are, and I've followed a lot of them, is that they rely upon this International Commission on Radiological Protection for their limits. You know, so in other words, everything that they agree is all right. When industries apply to them for a license, the Environment Agency then looks at their application, and if it passes the limits laid down by the International Commission on Radiological Protection, ICRP, they tick the box and they let it happen. Now, the problem I have with that is that the ECRR, which is the organisation that I set up in 1998, had published a report in 2003 and another one in 2010. That's this one here. That's the 2010 one there. It's quite a fat book, and it tells you how to calculate how many people are going to get cancer or die of some congenital disease or whatever after a dose of so many millisieverts. Now, it turns out, as a result of research that took place pretty much after Chernobyl, but certainly in the last 10 years, that it's totally obvious from published research in the literature, in the scientific literature, peer-reviewed research, it's totally clear that these limits are wildly incorrect and that lots and lots of people have died as a result of the application of these limits. Now, I've told the Environment Agency this, and I've produced enormous amounts of data and research publications and so forth, and the ECRR, who are all these other international scientists who joined this gang, have also created documents which show that the risk model is wrong. This risk model is wrong as it applies to internal radiation. Now, internal radiation is basically what the Environment Agency is about, because the Environment Agency is there, its remit is to protect the public from contamination, from environmental degradation due to poisons which are released from various operations. Of course, not just nuclear, all operations. And whenever somebody has an industry or an operation which produces contamination, then the Environment Agency's job is to see how much contamination and is it like to kill somebody, and if it is, are they justified in contaminating the environment on the level of utilitarianism? That is to say, is it a better thing to have the industry because it, for example, with nuclear, it produces a lot of cheap electricity, and we balance that against the number of people who are going to die of cancer, and that's pretty much how it works. That's called utilitarianism. It's the idea that you balance the good of the society against the harm to the individual. Well, first of all, that's not really that doesn't really align with human rights, because in fact you could have a slave society that operated on that level. But putting that to one side, the main problem with the ICRP model is that it's just wrong. It's based on the survivors of the Hiroshima explosion, and it's based on the idea of absorbed dose, and none of these first of all, the Hiroshima study was wrongly analysed, and so all of the data that is the basis for the ICRP model is just wrong, and in fact dishonestly wrong, because when they discovered that there were too many cancers, they took away the control group. That was in 1973. Anyway, the problem that I have now is that we have this impasse. We have the Environment Agency operating on the basis of an incorrect model, and the consequences of its operation are killing people. In fact, not small number of people either, a very large number of people. And it's easy to show that by epidemiology, which I've done, but other people have done as well. For example, recently, I mean about 3 or 4 months ago, there was a paper in the United States where 3 epidemiologists from Harvard University, no, it was Yale, sorry, no, it was Harvard, I think. Anyway, it's all on the internet. They studied the cancer rates in people living near nuclear sites. So in other words, they took all of the United States and they put all the nuclear sites on the map, and they looked at the cancer risk near the nuclear sites and compared them to the cancer risk far away from the nuclear sites. You would have think someone would have done that study before. But anyway, they did it. And they found that 2 things. They first of all, that the people living near the nuclear sites had a higher level of cancer, about 50% excess risk, from the people who were living far away. And they found that as you got closer to the nuclear site, the cancer risk went up. So it went up like that. So there's one piece of research that shows that. And there's lots and lots of other research that shows that. For example, I've studied long ago, in about 2001, I looked at the nuclear power station at Bradwell in Essex. This is a nuclear power station that one of the English ones started in 1966 or something thereabouts. And it releases a lot of radioactivity to the estuary of the River Blackwater. And that stuff floats about the place and it ends up in the mud. And it's measured. The Environment Agency measures it. So they know how much radioactivity is in the mud. But on the basis of the ICRP model, they would say that radioactivity is harmless because the dose that it gives is very low. Anyway, putting that to one side, I actually looked at the cancer rates. I managed to get them from the Office of National Statistics, and it showed that there was a doubling of risk at that nuclear power station in people living near the mud. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but that's the problem.
Yeah, and sorry for jumping in there. I suppose, I appreciate these are probably very important kind of issues that you're raising, but just want to make sure I kind of fully understand this, when I'm making notes. Just for a bit of context and background, I suppose what are the main aspects, for you, your organisation at the moment? I think you told me kind of primarily as a scientist, but in terms of I suppose which part of the nuclear sector are you kind of day to day most engaged with, would you say?
Well, I mean, I have tried this. I mean, I've written to the Environment Agency on occasions asking for various things, and I've always been fobbed off. I mean, we had the Environment Agency in a huge argument with me and this woman Collingwood about Hinkley Point. There's a big nuclear power station at Hinkley Point. They're building a new one. The French building a new one at Hinkley Point in Somerset, yeah? Anyway, the point is, it turned out that the area around there was contaminated with uranium, with enriched uranium. And there was no doubt about this because the Environment Agency's own data showed that it was contaminated with enriched uranium. But nothing came of it. They refused to concede that there was a contamination anyway. They said that there's no contamination, and they just told lies. And they told the local council that the people there who were concerned about this were all nutcases. I even organised an epidemiological study where the local people, they formed a group called Parents Concerned About Hinkley, PCAH. And they went around knocking on doors asking how many people had cancer. And when we analysed it, we found there was too much leukemia and there was too much breast cancer. And later on we looked at infant mortality and we found there was too many dead babies. So we're not talking about some kind of, arm-waving idiots, who don't know science. We're talking about real numbers. But the Environment Agency will not take any notice of this because they're controlled by the government. That's why. That's our problem. That's the fundamental problem, is they are not what they present to people. they present to people a sort of like organisation of public servants who look after people's health. That's what they say. And you know, and when they have these meetings like that one I went to, and they present all this stuff about how they're going to watch out for the future, and we're going to have fusion, and we're going to have new power stations, and everybody's going to be, and their job is to to make sure it's perfectly safe and everybody's going to be okay. It's just a lie. It's just theatre. It's tragic that we are in the position now that we are actually like the people against the government, and the government want to have more money and more nuclear and more control. And to do that, to get there, they have to have organisations that are dishonest. Fundamentally, they're dishonest, and that's my problem. That's the problem with the people at that meeting. You heard, if you saw the transcript of that meeting, you saw Max Wallace, who's an old mate of mine from long ago. You know, who's a very clever guy, mathematician, university mathematician. He was saying, look, this is all nonsense, you know. Why don't you listen to what the ECRR says? Why do you listen to what the ICRP says? And of course they gave him some waffle or another, you know, pushed it to one side, and this is what always happens. This is what always happens. There doesn't seem to be sort of like a plate glass. Now I'm now into sociology, right? We're talking about your sort of area now. Your area is like, why do people believe what they believe? And are still wrong. Okay, or you don't know whether they're wrong or not, but that's what you just have to register, that they believe these things, and then you present what they believe to the people that you work for, and then they will they'll do lots of PowerPoints about why we believe what we believe, right? And then they try and figure out how to stop us believing like that. But the problem you have is that this is science. This is not about belief. This is about numbers. And the numbers show that the Environment Agency are dishonest. That's it. You know, Guten Morgen. That's my problem.
Yeah, in that sense, there's like lots of feedback to the Environment Agency, isn't it? Like a lot of issues from your perspective. I just want to understand, like, in terms of your context and background, I suppose which functions do you kind of mainly interact with your role in terms of the nuclear side? Is it kind of day-to-day, is it more about advising on the regulatory activities?
Yes, essentially it's about the regulatory activities. This is the Environment Agency. It's about the regulatory activities, and it's about, well, I don't know if this comes under regulatory activities. It's about the about permitting. It's about just permitting unjustified developments. Okay. So in other words, what happens is somebody comes to the Environment Agency, like for instance Capenhurst. This Capenhurst is a good example. I've studied Capenhurst and I've read all their reports, and they made an application to the Environment Agency for the development of a tails facility. This was 2022 or 19 or something.